Good afternoon. My name is Jadyn Binkley, and today I'll be discussing the research I conducted on elderly driving habits. So, to provide some background information on my research, when conducting my introductory research, I learned that elderly people have been shown to cause around 80% of accidents. And the main reason that elderly drivers are usually involved in accidents is due to cognitive impairments that come with age, such as hearing loss, vision loss, or delayed reaction time, things like that. According to one of my cornerstone sources, elderly drivers balancing public safety with personal mobility, motor vehicle accidents are the leading cause of injury related deaths among those aged 65 to 74 years behind falls. And for further context, elderly drivers have a higher fatality rate per mile driven than any other age group except 16 to 25. And the fatality rate for drivers 85 years and older is 9 times higher than the fatality rate for drivers aged 25 to 69 years. So obviously this is a very relevant problem in our society today. People who aren't fully cognitive, like their cognitive ability isn't fully functioning the way it should, shouldn't be on the roads because they do pose a danger to other drivers. And we just need to come up with a solution to prevent these deaths and injuries from happening and make sure that people who are on the road are qualified to be driving. And then to provide some definitions for my terms, so I'm defining elderly drivers as people actively driving over the age of 65, and driving habits are the way a driver operates his or her vehicle and the behavior displayed while driving. So I personally interviewed people who lived in independent living facilities. So assisted living facilities normally have 3 to 4 different types of tracks people can take within them. So there's assisted living, which is people who need more help during the day, and they like to know that there's help there, like nurses and CNAs and things like that. And then there's rehabilitative care, which is after an injury or a surgery or things like that, they can stay in an assisted living facility just to get that care that they need before they go home and just rehabilitate them. And then me personally, what I focused on was independent living, where it's people who are around the elderly age that I mentioned earlier, 65 and above, but it can also be younger. If their families feel like they need to have someone nearby just in case something were to happen, but they still are allowed to just live and drive and leave and do everything like normal. So those that I interviewed were mostly independent living residents, but I also had a few of the rehabilitative residents, just because once they complete their rehabilitation, they are able to go back and do as they were before. So this is my foundational literature. So the following sources were crucial in developing my research question and method. My first cornerstone source, which was called Elderly Drivers Balancing Public Safety with Personal Mobility, discusses the risk that elderly drivers impose to other drivers and what benefits can come from having them retake their driver's test. So when conducting my introductory research, I thought about looking at some type of research into what does it actually benefit from making elderly drivers retake their driver's test at a certain age. And I found that right now in the United States, Indiana is the only state that does this, and it's for drivers aged 75 and above. When conducting my research, I also kind of realized with the limitations and the time and the resources provided to me, it would be unrealistic to try to change legislation within the time frame I was given, or kind of make elderly people retake those driving tests would be kind of hard with my resources. And so I kind of went on to a different path, which is their motivation. And so that was the first source. And then the second source explains how cognitive impairments that primarily affect the elderly population put them at high risk to be in accidents, such as what I discussed before, delayed reaction time, impaired hearing and vision, and just things like that that come with age. And then source number 3 discusses other ways to measure cognitive ability besides rote tests. This was very helpful for me. It helped me kind of model my research method, and then it also kind of showed a different side to making elderly drivers retake their driver's test, or things at family doctor's visits, like cognitive tests there, which kind of helped me see what could be more realistic in my time frame and resources I was given. And then my 4th source was pretty much my main source that I based everything off of. I modeled my survey after the survey conducted in this one, and I used some of their questions and kind of just changed the wording to fit more into my research. And it discusses the attitudes of elderly drivers and just gives statistics about elderly car accidents. So this all led to my research question, which is, what is the correlation between the number of accidents involving elderly drivers in Williamson County and when assisted living residents say they're most motivated to drive? So I kind of wanted to focus more on the motivation to see if when they say they're most motivated to drive would correlate to when they're on the roads the most and when the most accidents happen. And I was able to look at the number of accidents per year, and then what time of year and what time of day, by using a lots of different traffic safety websites, and I was able to narrow those down into just looking at Williamson County. So my hypothesis was that more elderly people would want to drive during the day, like whenever the weather was nice, because they would kind of feel less confident or be more afraid to drive in bad weather or when it was dark outside, because that adds on to the cognitive impairments they already have that come with age. And then since they are shown to be involved in the most accidents behind this age 16 to 25 population, I believed that according to my survey responses, whenever they said they were most motivated to drive, it would align with what I found in my data analysis of when the most accidents happen. So for my method, I did a mixed method, and I first conducted a data analysis, and then I conducted a survey, and then I organized my data into Google Sheets so that I could look at them side by side and try to draw a correlation between the two. So for my data analysis, I used multiple traffic safety resources and just public safety resources, such as TDOT, Tennessee Traffic Safety, the Nashville government website, Williamson County office, Road Safe Seniors, the CDC, and more. And I just wanted to make sure that I touched all my bases with these resources and make sure to just get all the information I possibly could, just to be able to draw any type of correlation between this information and my survey results. And so I used these websites to collect data on the number of crashes during the year from 2017 to 2021 in Williamson County. And then I was also able to look at how many elderly drivers were licensed in Williamson County and what percentage of those were involved in accidents each year. And then I used the data I gained from this to analyze alongside my survey results. So for my survey, I contacted 5 different assisted living facilities in Williamson County. And I made sure that the facilities I contacted had the independent living option, just so I could get the data from elderly drivers who are still driving and didn't stop a while ago because they went into a nursing home or assisted living. And so originally I had one different one, and I contacted them, and they let me know that they didn't have the independent option, and so they directed me to another, and that is where I gained most of my data from, so that was very helpful. And I got 2 responses, so of the 5, 2 of the 5 I went and interviewed the residents to be able to align that with my data analysis, and I brought consent forms to the assisted living facilities and then had a personal interview with the residents. So these are my results. So this is just my multiple choice questions, or yes or no questions. And so as you can see, there was 10 respondents, and for my first question, 10 out of 10 answered yes. The second question, 8 out of 10 answered yes. The third, 2 out of 10. The fourth, 6 out of 10, and then the fifth, it was 9 out of 10. So just to look at these closer. So my first yes or no question was, do you drive more than 5 days in a given week? And 10 out of 10 respondents said no. What I found while conducting these surveys was that a lot of the time, assisted living residents, even if they are in an independent living, they're provided most of the things they would need at the facility, so they don't really feel the need to leave. My second multiple choice question asked, do you find yourself driving more during a specific time of year, month, week, or day? And 8 out of the 10 responses answered yes to this question. It was usually what I hypothesized during the day when the weather was nice. They didn't really like to drive whenever they would feel less confident on the road. My third multiple choice question asked, have you ever been involved in a car accident? This would definitely be one of my limitations because I only got 2 respondents saying yes, and I think this could be due to some underlying bias or just embarrassment about the topic. And this question also has a short answer portion that I'll look at in a minute. My fourth multiple choice question asked, in your opinion, do you feel confident on the road? And 6 out of the 10 respondents answered yes. This is about what I thought would happen because since they don't really have to leave, many of them kind of lose that confidence after they live in assisted living for a bit, but then also most of them, since they are independent, they still feel good about driving. And then another question that could be affected by underlying bias. And then my fifth multiple choice question asked, do your driving habits tend to be influenced by outside factors? And 9 out of the 10 answered yes. So that aligns with my hypothesis that they would choose to drive more during certain times. So for my short answer questions, the first short answer question was, in your opinion, when do you most often drive? And this aligned with my hypothesis in that they said during the day when the weather was nice, kind of just as we've been discussing. And then the second short answer question asked, in your opinion, why do you usually leave home and drive? So this feeds more into the motivation portion of my research that I wanted to look at, and to be able to kind of predict when they would be on the roads to be able to prevent those accidents from happening. And most of them said to see family, or if they don't have family members that can drive them to doctor's appointments. And then there were also a few that said they drive themselves to like hair appointments or things like that because they don't have family members that will. And then as seen in my multiple choice question 3, the short answer portion of that question, which the question was, have you ever been involved in a car accident? And the short answer portion was, if yes, how old were you and what was the cause? And both respondents said that they were in the 16 to 25 age range that we discussed earlier that is involved in the most accidents. And they were both due to distracted driving reasons, which makes sense because whenever I was conducting my introductory research, while the elderly population is more affected by cognitive impairments, the younger population is kind of just still learning how to drive, and they pay less attention and make more like ignorant mistakes on the road. And then my last 2 short answer questions was, if you do not drive, why do you choose not to? Most of them said that they feel like they have everything they need at their facility and they feel less confident during certain conditions. And then the last short answer question was, you tend to drive to farther destinations or stay closer to home? And all respondents answered that they choose to stay closer. They don't feel the need to drive farther away, kind of like I've been discussing, that they feel like they have everything they need at their facility. So for my analysis, I organized my data in a spreadsheet to be able to compare my data analysis results to my survey results side by side. And I did end up finding a correlation between the two because contrary to my hypothesis that most accidents would happen during the nighttime or during times whenever cognitive impairments were more prevalent, they actually happen more during the day and in better conditions because elderly drivers, as we saw in the survey, feel more confident during those times, and so they were on the road more, which led to more accidents. And then I also found that there was a high percentage of the number of elderly drivers that were licensed in Williamson County being involved in accidents from 2017 to 2021. There's obviously an outlier in 2020 because of just, nobody was really out driving around and things like that. So my limitations would definitely be my sample size, because I did contact 5 different facilities, and my plan was to get 5 residents from each facility to have 25, because I felt like that was a realistic expectation with the time and resources given. But I did only have 2 responses from those facilities, so I had 10 respondents. And then bias, as we saw in my cornerstone sources, elderly drivers can kind of be more stubborn or embarrassed to admit to certain things happening, or admit that they are kind of suffering from those cognitive impairments. And then time and resources, with the framework given, I kind of wanted to delve more into the medical aspect of it, and like tests that can be conducted at family doctor visits, but it wasn't realistic with the time frame given, which is definitely a future direction or a gap for a future researcher that in the real world has more materials for that research. So my conclusions, so it did not align with my original hypothesis that more accidents would happen at nighttime or in worse conditions. And a correlation can be drawn between my data analysis and survey questions that more accidents happen when elderly drivers are more motivated to drive and on the road and during better conditions. And then definitely future researchers can delve deeper into the medical field or the hard sciences of it, studying the brain, studying how cognitive impairments affect with age. And then I also think a possible solution would be to implement more watch on the roads and traffic safety during these times of day whenever we know that elderly drivers are more motivated to drive, because it correlates with the number of accidents and roads.
Jane, thank you so much. All right, oral defense panel, question number 1.
How did you determine which results generated by your research method were most important in informing your new understanding?
So I feel like the results that were the most important were definitely the survey results, because being able to kind of have those conversations and just get the answers from the people themselves really showed the motivation behind it, which is exactly what I was going for, because whenever I was conducting my introductory research, I did find a gap in, we didn't really know the motivation behind elderly drivers being on the road, and there was more research into making them retake their driver's test or things like that, and I kind of wanted to get their perspective on it, instead of just trying to implement legislation or solutions that would kind of make them feel less independent or kind of blindsided by it. And then I also felt that it was more important to include my data analysis results from the number of elderly drivers in Williamson County involved in accidents rather than just all of Williamson County. I collected all of that data, but I only included the ones with elderly drivers because it correlated more with my survey results.
How do your findings provide direction for future research in the field?
So I feel like only one of my cornerstone sources and very few of my sources that I was reading in my introductory research kind of looked at tests that could be done during family doctor visits or more medical things like looking into things with the brain. And then there are also factors, obviously, such as Alzheimer's, dementia, and things like that, that affect cognitive impairment in elderly people. And I feel like that can be studied further by future researchers and how it correlates to driving and their driving habits on the road.
How did you handle the uncertainty of the research process?
So there definitely was some uncertainty in the research process. I kind of went into it just not really knowing what exactly I wanted to do, but I just used my sources that I read in my introductory research, and then also the guidance from my teachers and my expert advisors was really helpful in determining how to find a correlation, and then also learning more about statistics this year helped me to determine how to find a correlation. And I feel like I was able to handle the uncertainty by just kind of trusting what I knew to do, and by reading those articles and seeing what other researchers had already did and kind of building off of what they did is what helped me kind of overcome that uncertainty.
All right, thank you so much. All right, I'll open the floor for general questions.
I'm just curious. I know that, like, with
with prisons and stuff, it's really hard to get like responses from it because they're like a protected population. Is that a similar thing here, or is it just people not wanting to get back to it?
Yeah, so the other two, so I got 2 responses out of the 5 from the 5 assisted living facilities I contacted. And 2 of them just like didn't respond, and I called and it was just kind of like to no avail. But the other one, it was kind of like a protected population thing, and I think it honestly just depends on which one you're talking to, because some of them were like more open to it than others, and then also some of them were like more open to the public than others. Like some facilities are more restricted on like visitors and things like that. So I think it just all depends on that thing. And then definitely the consent forms and just kind of talking through to the people like what I need from them, and things like that helped to kind of offset that. If they knew what they were doing and like the facility allowed it, then it wasn't really an issue.
Yes, any other questions?
I have a couple of questions. First of all, I'm wondering, it would have been interesting to add a question just about how, when you went one-on-one to interview these particular participants, how they would feel about having their license taken, how would it affect them socially, emotionally, that type of thing. Did you run across anything by talking about that, or?
I didn't really run across that like whenever I was conducting my interview, just because none of my questions really asked anything about that. But I did think about that in the beginning whenever I first was like coming up with my methodology and things like that. I was going to conduct the interview on like, do you think you should have to retake your driver's test at a certain age? Like, do you feel like, I don't know. I wanted to do something like that, but then I had read in some of my sources that did kind of look at the retaking the driver's test. And then also whenever I got feedback, whenever we would do like kind of our introductory presentations, it was, could that be like a form of bias? Could it make them feel like you were kind of saying like, you need to retake your driver's test, like things like that? Like, would it have an effect on their answers to like the rest of the questions if they felt like they were being kind of like attacked?
I have a father in assisted living who is 80 and still drives all over the place and probably shouldn't be. So I was just curious about that because we have not approached that with me yet. But it's scary. I drive when I'm age of 20, you know. So my second question is, I have the pleasure of having you in class, but what are your plans for the future after graduation?
Okay, just to add on to what you said before that, sorry, but I also found like, what was I gonna say? I don't remember, but it was, oh yeah, a lot of things that I read on the traffic safety resources and things like that, like on TDOT, there are a lot of, I noticed like family resources and things like that, and it's like, in one of my cornerstone sources, the one that was like, elderly drivers, when is it time to take your keys away? It kind of talked about the family aspect of it and how it can be like really difficult to have that conversation, like ways to help with that. But anyways, after high school, I want to go to nursing school and become a nurse and possibly a nurse practitioner, like get my master's in it. I'm not really sure what like specialty I want to go into yet, but that's what I want to do. Is definitely something medical. I've always loved it. I've always had a passion for it.
I think you could change legislation as well if you wanted to.
So I have 2 questions. What drew you to this particular topic?
So I was kind of just playing around with different topics at the beginning of the year, because that's kind of what we did like in the class, was you kind of think about what you did in seminar last year, and then also just kind of looking at articles and things that are prevalent in the world today. And I don't know, I felt like this one just kind of stuck out to me. And I was just kind of talking, like bouncing ideas off my parents. And we were talking about like accidents involving younger people, but then I knew that younger people are kind of a harder population to pin down, because you do have to get like the parental consent and all those things. It's kind of harder to conduct research about them. And I also knew that elderly drivers were like, cognitive impairments affect them like in their daily lives. And so I felt like that would be a more effective topic of research, because whenever I was looking at my resources, I found more research done on the younger population and not as much on the elderly population. So I thought I could kind of use that to fill in that gap a little bit, lay another piece of the puzzle down.
What did you learn about yourself as a researcher and as a learner through this experience?
I don't know. I feel like this was just a really great growing experience for me. I didn't realize going into it how much you learn about, like, it's not just the research, which is also really helpful, and I'm sure will be really helpful in college and in my career, but also just like the people skills, like being personable with people and how to contact people, and how to build different things that are like I don't know, like we studied how to write like good emails, and that kind of helped me with like things such as my resume and just stuff like that. And I feel like it kind of taught me things about myself, like I just kind of need to jump headfirst into things, and it'll help me grow and learn more about stuff. So.
You guys, any other questions?
Just out of here, you mentioned your expert advisor being so informative and really helpful. Who was your expert advisor?
So she was the dean over the nursing school at Union University. So yeah, she was really cool. But she actually had kind of, I got directed to her from another nursing professor because I had originally contacted someone else, and she had actually done her own research kind of on geriatric patients, and it wasn't necessarily in like the driving field or things like that, but she kind of had some experience in the same field. So,
And I think the two that said that they did have an accident, but it was when they were like 17 or whatever. I think of that. Like out of 10, only 2 have ever had an accident, and that's only between 16 and 25. Like,
yeah,
that's
that's me too. And I feel like that was one of my like bigger limitations, because whenever I was reading the sources, then I did see that like a lot of problems they would have whenever conducting like cognitive testing or things like that was the stubbornness to admit that they were being affected by something. So.
Did you define accidents? Because I just went through this with my own parents, and like they didn't think fender benders were like an accident, and so this topic was so personal to me, because I just wrote a letter about a year ago to the state legislature about this big issue, and so it would have been interesting if you had actually included not only the residents themselves, but if you had reached out to faculty who had elderly parents and who were either dancing around this issue or who were actively embroiled in it, would have given you an interesting perspective as well.
Yeah, and I also like interviewing people who were just like out in the world, like not in assisted living facilities, but I knew that kind of within the confines of AP research, it would be easier to contact like people who were in independent living, just because you know you're going to have that population. And then also, whenever I was reading, I just keep looking. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like that is another like future direction would be to just contact people who are just living on their own. Because it actually surprised me how many people said that like they would drive themselves to doctor visits even if they didn't feel as confident on the road, just because their family members would. Like that was just shocking. But
All right, Jane, thank you so much.